He found a trapdoor in an abandoned fire lookout that had been sealed for 40 years, and what lay beneath would expose a secret worth $265 million that powerful people had killed to protect. Before we dive into the story, make sure to smash subscribe, because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. The wind carved through the Montana high country like a blade, sharp and unforgiving, the kind of cold that found every gap in your gear and reminded you that out here, nature didn't negotiate. Wade Mercer stood at the edge of a granite outcrop, his breath forming clouds in the thin November air, staring up at the silhouette of the old fire lookout perched on the ridge above. It looked like a forgotten sentinel, a wooden tower clinging to the mountainside, windows dark and empty, its once bright paint weathered to grey by decades of storms and sun. He'd been hiking these mountains for 23 years, ever since he'd left his job as a wildfire spotter and decided that the only boss he wanted was the sky. At 46, Wade was lean and weathered, his face carved by wind and time, beard streaked with grey, hands calloused from a life lived without shortcuts. Most people thought he was crazy for living alone in a cabin 18 miles from the nearest paved road. But Wade had learned something important during his years in the wilderness. The further you got from the noise of civilization, the clearer you could hear the truth. The lookout tower stood silent against the darkening sky. Wade had passed it 100 times over the years, always from a distance, never giving it much thought. It had been decommissioned in the early 1980s, back when the Forest Service started relying more on aircraft and satellites than solitary rangers stationed in remote towers. Most of the old lookouts had been maintained or torn down, but this one, Tower 17 they'd called it, had simply been abandoned. Locals said it was too remote, too expensive to access. Some said it was cursed. Wade didn't believe in curses, just poor planning and government bureaucracy. But something had pulled him here today. Maybe it was the storm moving in from the west, the kind that could dump 3 feet of snow and turn these mountains into a white maze for weeks. Or maybe it was something else, a feeling he couldn't quite name, the sense that after all these years of walking these ridges, there was still something he'd missed. He adjusted the pack on his shoulders and started the final climb. The trail had disappeared years ago, reclaimed by lodgepole pine and mountain mahogany. Wade moved through the terrain like water, reading the landscape, finding the path of least resistance. His boots crunched through patches of early snow. A raven called from somewhere above, its voice echoing off the granite walls. The air smelled like pine resin and coming weather. By the time he reached the base of the tower, the sun had dropped behind the western peaks, painting the sky in shades of copper and ash. The lookout sat on a platform of weathered timber, stilts that lifted it above the winter snowpack. A wooden staircase wound up to the cabin above, each step reinforced with rusted metal brackets. Wade tested the first step. Solid. Whoever had built this place had built it to last. He climbed slowly, the stairs creaking under his weight, until he stood on the platform outside the cabin door. The door was heavy, solid wood banded with iron, and it was padlocked. Not with some rusted antique, but with a relatively modern lock, maybe 15 years old. Wade's brow furrowed. Why would anyone put a new lock on an abandoned tower? He pulled his multi-tool from his belt and examined the mechanism. The lock was weathered but functional, and there was something else. Fresh scratches around the keyhole, the kind left by someone picking the lock or forcing it open. Someone had been here, and recently. Wade's instincts, honed by years of solitary vigilance, suddenly sharpened. He scanned the platform, the surrounding woods, the darkening sky. Nothing moved. He was alone. He gripped the lock and gave it a hard yank. The hasp was screwed into wood that had seen 40 winters, and wood like that became brittle, dry, weak. The screws gave way with a sharp crack, and the lock clattered to the platform floor. Wade pushed the door open. The hinges screamed in protest, a sound that sent a flock of birds scattering from the trees below. Inside, the air was stale but dry, untouched by the rot and mildew that claimed most abandoned buildings. Wade stepped across the threshold and pulled out his flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness. The cabin was a single square room, maybe 12 feet on each side, with windows on all four walls and a ceiling that peaked in the center. In the middle of the room stood an old fire finder, a circular map table with a sighting device used to pinpoint the location of smoke. Along the walls were built-in benches, a small desk, empty shelves. Everything was coated in dust, but there was something strange about it all. The cabin was too intact, too preserved. Abandoned buildings usually showed signs of animals, vandalism, water damage. This place looked like someone had simply locked the door one day and walked away, intending to return. Wade moved to the desk and opened the single drawer. Inside were a few pencils, a faded topographic map, and a small logbook. He picked up the logbook and flipped it open. The entries were written in neat handwriting, dated from June of 1982 through October of 1983. Each entry recorded weather conditions, visibility, and any smoke sightings. The last entry was dated October 14, 1983, written by someone named Samuel Hartfield. Wade read the final lines. Visibility clear. Early snow expected tonight. No smoke. All quiet. And then, in smaller letters beneath, as if added as an afterthought, if someone finds this, check below. The truth is buried, but not gone. Wade stared at those words for a long moment. Check below. He turned slowly, scanning the floor. The cabin was built on a platform, essentially a wooden box sitting on stilts. There shouldn't be anything below except open air and support beams. But as his flashlight beam swept across the floor, he noticed something. In the far corner, beneath one of the benches, the floorboards looked different. They were the same age, the same weathered wood, but the spacing was off, the gaps between the planks too uniform, too deliberate. Wade knelt down and ran his fingers along the seam. He pulled out his knife and wedged it into the gap, prying gently. The boards lifted easily, almost too easily, revealing that they weren't nailed down at all. They were a hatch, camouflaged to blend with the rest of the floor. Beneath the hatch was darkness and a wooden ladder descending into a space that shouldn't exist. Wade's heart rate picked up. He leaned over the opening and shone his light down. The ladder dropped about 8 feet into what looked like a carved-out chamber, a room dug directly into the rock beneath the tower's foundation. He could see the edges of wooden crates, the corner of something metallic, shadows that suggested the space was much larger than the cabin above. His mind raced through possibilities. A storage room for emergency supplies? A Cold War bunker? But none of that explained the fresh lock on the door or the cryptic message in the logbook. Wade knew he should leave, hike back down before dark, come back with proper equipment and maybe another person. But the storm was coming, and something deeper pulled at him. A curiosity that had kept him alive in the wilderness by always paying attention to things that didn't fit, things that were out of place. He tested the ladder. Solid. He swung his legs over the edge and began to descend. The temperature dropped as he climbed down, the air growing colder, denser. His boots hit stone floor, and he turned, sweeping his flashlight across the chamber. What he saw stopped his breath. The room was massive, at least 20 feet on each side, with walls of carved granite shored up with timber supports. It was a real excavation, professional, engineered, and it was filled with containers. Dozens of wooden crates lined one wall, each stenciled with numbers and codes Wade didn't recognize. Metal filing cabinets stood against another wall, their drawers slightly open, manila folders visible inside. In the center of the room sat several larger objects covered with heavy canvas tarps, their shapes suggesting frames, boxes, irregular bundles. Wade approached the nearest crate and pried off the lid. Inside, nestled in straw and cloth wrapping, were artifacts, pottery, beadwork, ceremonial items. He carefully lifted a piece, a stunning basket woven with intricate geometric patterns, the kind of craftsmanship that spoke of centuries of tradition. His hands trembled slightly as he set it down and moved to the next crate. More artifacts, stone tools, textiles, carved figures. Every piece looked museum quality, carefully preserved, wrapped with the kind of care that spoke of deep respect. Wade's mind struggled to process what he was seeing. Why were these here, hidden beneath an abandoned fire lookout in the middle of nowhere? He moved to the filing cabinets and pulled open the top drawer. Inside were folders organized by year, each containing photographs, documents, and handwritten notes. Wade pulled out a folder marked 1978 and flipped it open. The first page was a newspaper clipping from the Denver Post. Museum heist nets $2 million in Native American artifacts. Wade's blood ran cold. He grabbed another folder. More clippings. Art theft ring suspected in Park Service scandal. Priceless artifacts missing from Smithsonian collection. Federal investigation stalls in museum robbery case. Each article described thefts, unsolved cases, missing artifacts, and each one dated back to the late 1970s and early 1980s. Wade's flashlight beam trembled in his hand. He turned to the canvas-covered objects in the center of the room and pulled back the first tarp. Beneath it was a painting in an ornate gilt frame, an oil landscape that even Wade, no art expert, recognized as old and valuable. He moved to the next covering. More paintings, sketches, a sculpture. His breath came faster now. This wasn't just a collection. This was a vault, a hiding place for stolen treasures worth an unimaginable fortune. But who had put them here, and why? He returned to the filing cabinet and dug deeper, looking for answers. Near the back of the bottom drawer, he found a leather-bound journal, worn and water-stained. The name embossed on the cover made his heart stop. Samuel Hartfield. The same name from the logbook upstairs. Wade opened the journal carefully, and in the dim light of his flashlight, he began to read. The first entry was dated March 5, 1977. I've been assigned to Tower 17 for the season. Remote post 3-month rotation. Quiet up here. Good for thinking. The entries continued. Mundane observations about weather, wildlife, the solitude of the work. But then, several months in, the tone changed. July 20th, 1977. Saw something strange today. 2 men hiking in from the North Ridge, civilian clothes but moving like military. They were carrying heavy packs, too heavy for a day hike. They didn't see me watching. They entered the old mining cave system about a mile west. Stayed inside for 2 hours, came out with empty packs. What were they leaving in there? Wade flipped ahead. The entries grew more detailed, more concerned. August 3rd, 1977. Followed the men's trail to the cave. Found fresh excavation inside, timber supports, new locks. This isn't mining, this is storage. But for what? I reported it to my supervisor. He told me to mind my own business. September 9th, 1977. I can't let this go. Did research at the library during my break. Those men match descriptions from an FBI bulletin about artifact smuggling. I think they're using the National Forest as a hiding place for stolen goods. October 1st, 1977. I was right. I found one of their caches in the cave system. Native artifacts, museum pieces. They're stealing cultural treasures and hiding them in the wilderness until the heat dies down. When I tried to report it again, my supervisor threatened my job. Said I was imagining things, causing trouble. Wade's hands tightened on the journal. He could feel Samuel's frustration, his isolation, bleeding through the pages. The entries continued over months, detailing Samuel's growing realization that he'd stumbled onto something much bigger than a few thieves, a network of corrupt officials, smugglers, people in positions of power who were stripping museums and archaeological sites and selling artifacts on the black market. And Samuel Hartfield, a solitary fire lookout with no backup and no one who would listen, had decided to do something about it. December 12th, 1978. I've started intercepting them. When I find a cache, I move it before they can retrieve it. I bring the artifacts here to the tower. I've excavated a chamber beneath the foundation, carved into the rock. It's slow work, done in secret, but it's the only way to preserve these pieces until I can find someone trustworthy to report this to. The FBI field office in Billings is compromised. I've seen proof. January 20th, 1979. They know someone is interfering, but they don't know it's me. They think it's rival smugglers. Good. Let them tear each other apart. April 8th, 1980. The collection is growing. Every piece I save is a piece of history preserved, a piece of someone's heritage protected. I know I'm breaking regulations by keeping these here, but what choice do I have? If I turn them over to local authorities, they'll disappear again. Wade flipped through more pages, watching Samuel's mission consume him. The man had spent years alone on this mountain, not just watching for fires, but waging a solitary war against a criminal network. He'd catalogued every piece, photographed everything, documented the smuggling routes, the names, the connections. It was all here, evidence that could bring down powerful people, evidence worth killing for. The final entries grew darker. August 2nd, 1983. They're getting closer. Someone leaked that there's a fire lookout who's been asking questions. I've had visitors, men who ask too many questions about what I've seen. I play dumb, but I don't know how much longer I can keep this up. September 24th, 1983. I need to get this evidence out, but I can't trust anyone in the official channels. I've written letters to journalists, historians, people outside the system. I just need to survive until someone believes me. October 14th, 1983. This is the last entry I'll make. If you're reading this, it means I didn't make it out. Or it means enough time has passed that the truth can finally come out. Everything is documented. Every piece is catalogued. The filing cabinets contain all the evidence needed to bring these people to justice. Don't let this be buried again. The artifacts belong to the people they were stolen from. The truth deserves to see daylight. Samuel Hartfield. Wade closed the journal slowly, his chest tight. He knew what had happened to Samuel Hartfield. Everyone in the region knew the story. In late October of 1983, Samuel had radioed in his regular weather report, then fallen silent. A search team had been sent out a week later when he missed his next scheduled check-in. They'd found the tower locked and empty, no signs of struggle, no body. Samuel Hartfield had simply vanished into the wilderness. The official report listed him as lost, presumed dead, victim of the early winter storms. But Wade knew better now. Samuel hadn't gotten lost. He'd been silenced, disappeared by people who couldn't afford to let his evidence surface. And for 40 years, this vault had remained sealed, its secrets buried beneath an abandoned tower, while the world forgot about a fire lookout who'd tried to do the right thing. Wade stood in the center of the chamber, surrounded by $265 million worth of stolen history, evidence of crimes that had never been solved, proof of a conspiracy that had been successfully buried for 4 decades. His mind raced. What should he do? He lived off the grid by choice, avoided authorities, kept to himself. Getting involved in something like this would shatter the quiet life he'd built. But the image of Samuel Hartfield, alone on this mountain, fighting a battle no one knew about, wouldn't leave him. The wind howled outside, rattling the tower above. The storm was arriving. Wade knew he needed to leave soon or risk being trapped here for days. He took a final look around the chamber, his flashlight beam catching on the stacked crates, the filing cabinets full of evidence, the artifacts that represented countless stolen voices and histories. He thought about Samuel's final words, "Don't let this be buried again." Wade Mercer had spent 23 years in these mountains avoiding exactly this kind of responsibility, this kind of weight. But standing in that cold stone vault, holding the journal of a dead hero, he realized that some things were bigger than the life you chose for yourself. Some truths demanded to be told, no matter the cost. He carefully placed Samuel's journal in his pack, along with several folders of documents. He couldn't carry everything, but he could carry enough to prove what was down here. Tomorrow, he'd have to decide who to trust with this information. Tonight, he just needed to survive the climb down in the growing dark. Wade climbed the ladder back into the cabin and carefully replaced the hatchboards, covering his discovery. He stepped out onto the platform. The temperature had dropped 10 degrees, and the first snowflakes were beginning to fall, small and hard, like frozen needles. The forest below was already disappearing into white. He descended the tower stairs quickly, his mind still processing everything he'd seen. Halfway down, he stopped, There were fresh tracks in the snow at the base of the tower, boot prints that hadn't been there 30 minutes ago. Someone else was here. Wade's hand went to the knife on his belt. He scanned the darkening tree line, every sense alert. A branch cracked somewhere to his left, then a voice cut through the wind, calm and cold. I was wondering when someone would finally find it. Wade turned slowly. Two men stepped out from behind the pines, both dressed in expensive outdoor gear, the kind city people wore when they wanted to look like they belonged in the wilderness. But their eyes were hard, professional. These weren't hikers. "That's far enough," Wade said quietly, his hand still on his knife. The first man, tall with silver hair despite looking only 50, smiled without warmth. "Easy, friend. We're not here to hurt you. We're here to make sure history stays where it belongs." "And where's that?" Wade asked. "Buried." The second man, shorter but built like a fighter, took a step closer. "You opened the tower. You went down into the vault. What did you see?" Wade's mind calculated distances, routes, options. He was outnumbered, but he knew this mountain in ways these men never would. "Just some old ranger station. Nothing interesting." The silver-haired man laughed. "Don't insult us. Samuel Hartfield spent 5 years building that collection, and we've spent 40 years making sure no one found it. Now you walk up here on the one day it matters and just happen to break in." Wade's blood ran cold. "You've been watching the tower. Motion sensors, trail cameras. Technology's come a long way since 1983. We knew the moment you stepped onto the platform." The shorter man pulled back his jacket, revealing a holstered pistol. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to give us whatever you took from down there. Then you're going to walk back to wherever you came from and forget you were ever here." Wade's grip tightened on his knife, but his voice stayed level. "And if I don't?" The silver-haired man's smile vanished. "Then you disappear, just like Samuel Hartfield, just like everyone else who got too curious. This mountain has swallowed plenty of people over the years. One more won't raise any questions." The snow was falling harder now, the wind picking up. Wade could feel the storm rolling in, heavy and thick. In another hour, visibility would be 0. "You killed him," Wade said quietly. "Samuel Hartfield." "We protected important interests," the man replied. "Samuel was a good man, but he didn't understand the bigger picture. Some artifacts are worth more as commodities than as museum pieces. Some secrets protect more than they harm. Tell that to the people whose heritage you stole." The shorter man pulled his pistol free. "Enough talk. The pack. Now." Wade's mind raced. He couldn't outrun bullets, but he didn't have to. He just had to outrun these men in a storm, on a mountain he knew better than his own reflection. He slowly shrugged off his pack and held it out. "It's all here. Documents, the journal, everything." As the shorter man reached for the pack, Wade threw it directly at his face and ran, not down the mountain toward his cabin, but up toward the summit ridge, toward terrain that would test every ounce of skill he had. Behind him, he heard shouting, then the crack of a gunshot that echoed off the rocks. But Wade was already gone, swallowed by the white fury of the storm, carrying the truth of Samuel Hartfield deeper into the mountains, knowing that one way or another, this secret was finally going to see daylight. The wilderness had hidden it long enough. What happens next will turn this mountain into a battlefield, reveal a truth that powerful men killed to protect, and prove that some voices can't be silenced even after 40 years. Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. Wade's lungs burned as he pushed through the deepening snow, his boots finding purchase on rocks he couldn't see, following a path carved into his memory from decades of walking these ridges. The gunshot still echoed in his ears, but the storm was his ally now, a white curtain dropping between him and the men who wanted him silent. He didn't look back. Looking back in a whiteout could mean a fatal misstep, a plunge off an unseen ledge. He climbed higher, toward the granite saddle that connected two peaks, a route most hikers avoided even in good weather. Behind him, he could hear voices shouting, growing fainter as the wind swallowed their words. They were city hunters playing in a wilderness that didn't forgive mistakes. The saddle was a knife edge of rock barely 3 feet wide with drops of 200 feet on either side. In summer, it was treacherous. In a snowstorm at dusk, it was nearly suicidal. Wade crossed it without hesitation, his body remembering every footfall, his hands finding the small holds he'd used 100 times before. On the far side, he dropped into a cluster of boulders and allowed himself 30 seconds to catch his breath. His pack was gone, thrown at the shorter man's face, but Samuel's journal was still tucked inside his jacket, pressed against his ribs like a second heartbeat. The documents were lost, but the journal contained the core of everything: names, dates, locations, Samuel's meticulous documentation of the theft ring's operations. It was enough. It had to be enough. Wade pulled out his phone from his inner pocket, praying for even a single bar of signal. Nothing. He was too deep in the mountains, too far from any cell tower. He'd have to get lower, closer to civilization, but not back the way he'd come. Those men would be watching his cabin, waiting for him to lead them there. He needed to circle around, use the storm as cover, and reach the old logging road on the east side of the range. From there it was 8 miles to the highway, to people, to safety. He started moving again, angling down through a forest of lodgepole pine so thick the snow barely penetrated. His mind worked through the problem methodically. Who could he trust with this information? The local sheriff was a good man, but he was also outgunned and outmaneuvered by people with resources and connections. Wade needed someone bigger, someone outside the local power structure, someone who couldn't be bought or threatened into silence. The temperature continued to drop. Wade's breath came in frozen clouds, his beard crusting with ice. He'd been in worse storms, survived longer nights, but never while being hunted. Every snap of a branch made him freeze. Every shadow in the swirling white made his hand go to his knife. He moved like a ghost through the forest, leaving minimal tracks, using rock outcrops and fallen logs to break up his trail. 2 hours after leaving the tower, he reached the tree line and paused. Below him, through gaps in the storm, he could see the faint lights of Red Lodge, a small town nestled in the valley, still 10 miles away as the crow flies, but closer to 15 following the terrain. He'd have to descend through the boulder field, cross Miller Creek, and navigate the old logging roads in complete darkness. Behind him, higher on the mountain, he saw the brief flash of a light. They were still searching, still tracking. These men weren't giving up. Wade started down, his movements careful and deliberate. The boulder field was a maze of house-sized rocks deposited by ancient glaciers, each one slick with ice and snow. One wrong step could mean a broken ankle, a death sentence in these conditions. He picked his way through slowly, testing each foothold, using his hands to steady himself. Halfway through the field, he heard it, the distant thrum of a helicopter. Wade pressed himself against a boulder and looked up. Through the snow, he could see lights sweeping across the mountainside, a search pattern, systematic and thorough. They'd called in air support. His jaw tightened. These weren't just criminals protecting a stash. These were people with serious resources, the kind of people who could make a helicopter appear in the middle of a blizzard without raising questions. The kind of people Samuel Hartfield had been fighting 4 decades ago. The helicopter passed overhead, its searchlight cutting through the snow like a blade, missing Wade by 30 feet. He waited until the sound faded, then continued his descent. By the time he reached Miller Creek, it was fully dark, the kind of mountain darkness that pressed against your eyes like a physical thing. The creek was running fast, swollen with snowmelt and rain, the water black and angry. Wade knew this crossing. In summer, it was knee-deep and manageable. Tonight, it would be waist-deep and cold enough to kill him in minutes if he wasn't careful. He found the log bridge, a massive fallen pine that had spanned the creek for at least 20 years. Ice coated its surface, and the water roared 4 feet below. Wade didn't hesitate. He stepped onto the log and began to cross, arms outstretched for balance, boots sliding on the ice with each step. Halfway across, his foot slipped. For a heart-stopping moment, he teetered over the black water, arms windmilling. Then his other boot caught a rough patch of bark, and he steadied himself. He took 3 more careful steps and jumped the final distance to the far bank. He was soaked from the knees down now, and the cold immediately began to work its way into his bones. He needed to keep moving, needed to generate heat, or hypothermia would take him before the men with guns ever got close. The logging road appeared through the trees like an old friend, 2 parallel ruts carved through the forest, overgrown but still navigable. Wade turned east and started jogging, ignoring the burning in his legs and the ice forming on his pants. His mind drifted to Samuel Hartfield as he ran. What had those final days been like for the fire lookout? Had he known they were coming for him? Had he hoped, right up until the end, that someone would arrive to help? Wade had spent his adult life avoiding exactly this kind of entanglement, this kind of moral weight. After his years as a wildfire spotter, watching forests burn and being powerless to stop them, he'd retreated into solitude. No responsibilities beyond his own survival, no connections that could be severed, no causes worth dying for. But Samuel hadn't had that luxury. He'd stumbled onto evil and decided to fight it, alone, with nothing but his integrity and his courage, and it had cost him everything. Wade's hand went to the journal inside his jacket. The least he could do was make sure Samuel's sacrifice meant something. An hour later, frozen and exhausted, Wade stumbled onto Highway 12. The road was empty, the storm keeping even the most determined travelers off the pavement. He pulled out his phone again. 2 bars. Enough. His fingers, numb with cold, fumbled with the screen. Who to call? Not 911, that would route to local dispatch, and he didn't know who might be listening. He needed someone outside the system, someone with the authority and independence to act on what he'd found. Then he remembered. 3 years ago, he'd guided a group of journalists doing a story on wilderness conservation. One of them had been different from the others, asking questions that went deeper, pushing past the easy narrative. Her name was Catherine Reeves, and she'd worked for a major investigative outlet, the kind that took down senators and exposed corporate fraud. She'd given Wade her card, told him if he ever saw something that needed attention, to call. He'd kept the card, not because he thought he'd ever use it, but because something about her had impressed him. Now, he pulled out his battered wallet and found the card, creased and faded, but still readable. He dialed the number. It rang 4 times before a voice answered, professional but cautious. Catherine Reeves. Miss Reeves, this is Wade Mercer. We met 3 years ago. I guided you through the Absaroka Range. A pause. Wade, I remember. It's what? Midnight. Are you okay? No, Wade said, his voice rough from cold and exhaustion. I need your help. I found something in the mountains, something people are willing to kill for. Another pause, longer this time. When she spoke again, her voice had changed, sharpened with focus. Are you safe right now? For the moment. I'm on Highway 12, about 10 miles north of Red Lodge, but there are men hunting me. They have a helicopter, resources. Miss Reeves, I found evidence of a theft ring that's been operating for over 40 years. Stolen artifacts, museum pieces, worth hundreds of millions. And I have proof. Where's the proof? Most of it's still at the site. But I have a journal written by a fire lookout named Samuel Hartfield who documented everything before he disappeared in 1983. He heard the sharp intake of breath on the other end. Samuel Hartfield. Jesus, Wade, do you know who he was? A fire lookout who tried to stop criminals. He was more than that. He was a legend in the Native American community. There were rumors for years that he'd intercepted stolen artifacts, that he'd been killed for trying to protect cultural heritage, but there was never any proof. Every investigation hit a wall. Wade's chest tightened. The proof is here, all of it, but I need help. These people, they're connected, powerful. They made a man disappear 40 years ago, and they're trying to do it again. Where exactly are you? Catherine's voice was all business now. I can have people there in 2 hours. No, Wade said quickly. not local people. They'll be compromised or outmaneuvered. I need federal authorities, FBI Art Theft Division, someone who can't be bought. I have contacts in the Denver field office, good people. Can you get somewhere safe for a few hours? Wade looked up and down the empty highway. Through the snow, he could see the lights of a small gas station about a mile ahead. There's a truck stop ahead. I'll wait there. Wade, listen to me carefully. Don't talk to anyone. Don't tell anyone what you found. Order coffee, stay in public view, and wait for my call. I'm going to make some calls, but this is going to move fast once it starts. Understood. And Wade, thank you for calling me. What you found, it's important. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. The line went dead. Wade pocketed his phone and started walking toward the lights of the truck stop, his body shaking with cold but his mind clear. He'd made his choice. There was no going back now. What happens next will expose a conspiracy that reaches higher than anyone imagined, bring justice to a man who died defending the truth, and prove that even 40 years of silence can't bury what's right. Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. The truck stop was a lonely outpost of fluorescent light and diesel fumes, the kind of place that existed to serve the endless stream of freight haulers moving goods across the mountain west. Wade pushed through the glass door, and the warmth hit him like a wall, painful after the hours of cold. A bell chimed overhead. The place was nearly empty at this hour, just one trucker hunched over coffee at the counter and a teenager working the register with headphones in, lost in whatever world lived inside his phone. Wade made his way to the bathroom first, needing to assess the damage. In the harsh light of the mirror, he looked like exactly what he was. A man who'd been running for his life through a blizzard. His face was windburned, beard caked with ice, eyes bloodshot and sunken. His pants were frozen stiff from the creek crossing, and his hands shook as he ran them under warm water. He stripped off his outer layers and did his best to dry his clothes under the hand dryer, knowing that hypothermia was still a risk if he didn't get properly warm. 20 minutes later, cleaned up as much as possible, Wade sat in a corner booth with a view of both the entrance and the parking lot. He'd ordered coffee and a burger he couldn't taste, his body too flooded with adrenaline to care about food. But he forced himself to eat, knowing he'd need the calories for whatever came next. Outside, the storm continued to rage, snow piling up on the few vehicles in the parking lot. Wade pulled out Samuel's journal and opened it on the table, reading by the dim light of the booth. The pages were filled with more than just documentation of the theft ring. Samuel had written about his life, his thoughts, his loneliness. February 7th, 1980. Sometimes I wonder if anyone would notice if I didn't radio in. If I just walked into the woods one day and kept walking. But then I think about the artifacts down below, all those pieces of history that would be lost if I gave up. I guess that's what keeps me here. Not duty to the Forest Service, but duty to something bigger. Duty to truth. Wade's throat tightened. He'd felt that same loneliness, that same questioning of purpose. But Samuel had found something to fight for, even when it cost him everything. March 15th, 1981. I've been thinking about legacy lately. What do we leave behind when we're gone? I don't have children, no wife waiting at home. My family stopped talking to me years ago when I chose this life. So what's my mark on the world? Maybe it's these artifacts. Maybe it's making sure that what was stolen gets returned. Maybe that's enough. Wade turned more pages, and the entries grew darker as Samuel documented increasing pressure from the theft ring. June 6th, 1982. They sent someone to talk to me today. Called himself a representative of private collectors. Offered me $50,000 to forget what I'd seen, to stop interfering. When I refused, he stopped smiling. Said I should think carefully about my choices, about what happens to people who can't mind their own business. I reported it. Again. Nothing happened. Again. September 3rd, 1982. I've started cataloging everything in detail, creating a record that can't be ignored. Every artifact photographed, every document copied. If something happens to me, This journal and the files below will tell the whole story. I've hidden copies in 3 different locations. They can't silence all of them. Wade paused on that entry. 3 different locations. Samuel had made backup copies of his evidence, hidden them somewhere in these mountains. If Wade could find them, it would corroborate everything in the journal, make the case even stronger. His phone buzzed. Catherine Reeves. Wade, I have news. I've contacted FBI agent Marcus Dalton, head of the Art Crime Team's Western Division. He's based in Denver, but he's already mobilizing a team. They'll be there by dawn. How much did you tell him? Everything you told me. He's taking this seriously. Apparently, the Hartfield case has been on the FBI's cold case list for decades. There are people who've never stopped believing he was murdered for what he knew. Wade felt relief wash over him. What do I do until they arrive? Stay where you are. Agent Dalton asked me to tell you not to go back to the site, not to contact anyone locally, and not to let the journal out of your sight. He's treating this as an active crime scene and a threat to your safety. The men who were chasing me, they had serious resources. Helicopter, surveillance equipment. This isn't just some random criminals. Dalton said the same thing. The theft ring Samuel documented was believed to have ties to organized crime and corrupt officials. If it's still operating after 4 decades, that suggests serious institutional protection. Wade's jaw tightened. How high does this go? That's what they're going to find out. But Wade, you need to understand something. When you blow the lid off something this big, there will be fallout. People will lose careers, maybe face prison time. They'll fight back hard. I know. And your life is going to change. You can't go back to your cabin and pretend this didn't happen. You're going to be a witness, probably in court, definitely in public view. Wade looked out at the storm, at the mountains he'd called home for over 2 decades. The thought of leaving, of being pulled into a world of lawyers and trials and scrutiny, made his chest tighten. But then he thought of Samuel Hartfield, who'd given up everything, including his life, for the truth. I didn't choose this, Wade said quietly, but I'm not walking away from it. Good man. Dalton's team will be there by 6 a.m. Until then, stay alert. If you see anything suspicious, anyone watching you, call 911 and then call me immediately. Understood. Wade hung up and returned to the journal. He read through the final entries again, looking for clues about where Samuel might have hidden the backup copies of his evidence. October 2nd, 1983. They're closing in. I can feel it. I've made arrangements to send the duplicates to people I trust, historians and tribal elders who will know what to do with them. The first package goes to the Crow Agency, addressed to Elder Thomas White Eagle. The second goes to Dr. Maria Santos at the University of Montana, Department of Anthropology. The third stays hidden at the old shepherd's cabin near Granite Peak. If I don't make it, I pray one of these packages will survive. Wade's mind raced. The Crow Agency and the university were institutions, official places with records. If Samuel had sent those packages, there would be some trace. But the shepherd's cabin was different. Wade knew the place, an abandoned stone structure tucked into a high valley 3 miles from the tower. If Samuel had hidden evidence there, it might still be intact after 40 years, protected from the elements by stone walls and isolation. He made a mental note to tell Agent Dalton about all 3 locations. But first, he had to survive until dawn. Outside, headlights swept across the parking lot. Wade tensed, watching as a black SUV pulled in and parked near the entrance. 2 men got out, both dressed in outdoor gear, both moving with the controlled precision of people who knew how to handle themselves. Wade's hand went to his knife. Were these the men from the mountain? Had they tracked him here? The men entered the truck stop, and Wade forced himself to stay still, to not draw attention. They approached the counter, ordered coffee, and stood talking in low voices while they waited. Wade couldn't hear their conversation, but he watched them carefully in the reflection of the window. After a few minutes, they collected their drinks and left, climbing back into the SUV. The vehicle sat in the parking lot for another 5 minutes, engine running, before finally pulling back onto the highway and disappearing into the storm. Wade exhaled slowly. Were they watching him? or just travelers stopping for coffee. Paranoia whispered that everyone was a threat now, that the theft ring's reach was everywhere. But Wade forced himself to think rationally. If those men had been sent to silence him, they would have acted. They wouldn't have simply ordered coffee and left. Still, the encounter left him rattled. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, that somewhere in the darkness, eyes were tracking his every move. He pulled out his phone and checked the time. 3:45 a.m. 2 hours and 15 minutes until the FBI arrived. It felt like an eternity. The trucker at the counter paid his bill and left, rumbling out of the parking lot in an 18-wheeler that sprayed snow in its wake. The teenager working the register yawned and disappeared into the back room, leaving Wade alone in the dining area. The silence pressed in, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator units and the rattle of wind against the windows. Wade returned to the journal, reading entries he'd already read, looking for details he might have missed. Samuel wrote about the artifacts with reverence, describing each piece as if it were a holy object. March 22nd, 1980. Found a basket today, Paiute weaving, maybe 100 years old. The craftsmanship is breathtaking. Every strand placed with intention, with meaning. Someone's grandmother made this, taught their daughter how to make it, passed down knowledge that goes back centuries, and someone stole it, was going to sell it to a collector who would hide it in a private vault where no one could see it, where it would die in darkness. I can't let that happen. I won't. Wade understood that feeling now, the weight of responsibility, the refusal to look away. He'd spent years avoiding that weight, keeping his life simple and his obligations minimal. But some truths couldn't be ignored. Some fights chose you, whether you wanted them or not. At 4:30 a.m., the door chimed again. Wade's hand went to his knife as he looked up. An elderly woman entered, wrapped in a thick coat and moving slowly, a trucker's wife by the look of her, weathered and kind. She smiled at Wade as she made her way to the coffee station. "Quite a storm," she said, her voice warm and gravelly. "You look like you've been through it." "Long night," Wade replied carefully. "Well, you're safe now. That's what matters." She poured herself a coffee and settled into a booth on the far side of the room. Wade relaxed slightly. Just a traveler. Just another soul passing through in the dark hours before dawn. At 5:15 a.m., Wade's phone buzzed again. A text from Catherine Reeves. "Dalton's team is 30 minutes out. They're meeting you at the truck stop. Stay put." Relief flooded through him. 30 minutes. He could last 30 minutes. He finished the last of his cold coffee and closed the journal, tucking it securely back inside his jacket. Through the window, he could see the sky beginning to lighten in the east, the storm finally breaking. The snow had stopped, leaving the world buried under fresh white, pristine and quiet. At 5:43 a.m., 3 black SUVs pulled into the parking lot in formation, their movements coordinated and professional. Wade stood as the doors opened and several people emerged, all wearing FBI windbreakers over tactical gear. A tall man in his 50s, black hair shot through with grey, approached the truck stop entrance with purpose. Wade met him at the door. "Wade Mercer?" the man asked, extending his hand. "I'm Agent Marcus Dalton, FBI Art Crime Team. Let's talk." They sat in the booth and Wade laid out everything he'd found. The tower, the vault, the artifacts, the journal, the men who'd chased him through the storm. Dalton listened without interrupting, his eyes sharp and focused. When Wade finished, Dalton leaned back and exhaled slowly. "Mr. Mercer, what you've stumbled onto is one of the most significant art theft cases in American history. Samuel Hartfield's disappearance has haunted the FBI for 40 years. We've always believed he was murdered, but we never had evidence, never had enough to move forward. You just changed that." "What happens now?" Wade asked. "Now we secure the site, recover the artifacts, and begin the process of bringing these people to justice. The men who chased you, we'll find them. The network Samuel documented, we'll dismantle it. This ends today." Dalton pulled out a tablet and began taking notes. "I need you to tell me everything again, every detail, no matter how small. Locations, descriptions, anything Samuel wrote about names or connections. We're going to build a case that can't be ignored. Wade began again, and this time he held nothing back, describing every crate, every file, every word in Samuel's journal that might matter. As he spoke, the sun rose over the mountains, painting the snow-covered peaks in shades of gold and pink. The storm had passed. The truth was finally coming to light. And somewhere on that distant mountain, in a stone vault beneath an abandoned tower, Samuel Hartfield's legacy waited to be honored, 40 years late, but not forgotten. Not anymore. Agent Dalton closed his tablet and looked Wade in the eyes. You did the right thing. Samuel would be proud. Wade's throat tightened. He nodded, unable to speak. Outside, the FBI team was already mobilizing, preparing to return to the tower, to recover the artifacts, to finish what Samuel Hartfield had started 4 decades ago. And Wade Mercer, the mountain man who'd lived his life avoiding exactly this kind of entanglement, had become the key to unlocking the biggest cold case in the region's history. The vault was about to give up its secrets. *Do not put the script on a document. 12:03 a.m. The convoy of FBI vehicles moved up the mountain road like a steel serpent. 4 SUVs and a tactical transport truck carrying equipment that would turn the remote tower site into a fully operational crime scene within hours. Wade sat in the lead vehicle next to Agent Dalton, watching the familiar landscape pass by through eyes that hadn't closed in over 30 hours. His body screamed for sleep, but his mind remained sharp, focused, aware that the men who'd chased him through the storm were still out there somewhere, watching, planning their next move. "Tell me about the men again," Dalton said, his eyes on the winding road ahead. "Every detail you can remember." Wade closed his eyes, pulling up the memory. The first one, the one who did most of the talking, was tall, maybe 6'2", silver hair, but he couldn't have been older than 50. Expensive gear, Arc'teryx jacket, Salomon boots, the kind of stuff that costs more than most people's monthly rent. But he moved like someone comfortable in the outdoors, not just playing dress-up. Military bearing, maybe. Confident. And the second? Shorter, 5'9" or 5'10", built like a boxer, dark hair scar through his left eyebrow. He was the muscle, the one who pulled the gun. But he followed the silver-haired man's lead, took orders without question. Dalton nodded, making mental notes. The silver-haired man. Did he give you a name? No, but he knew about Samuel Hartfield, talked about him like they'd been playing a long game, waiting 40 years for someone to find the vault. He said they had motion sensors, trail cameras. They've been monitoring that tower for decades. That level of commitment suggests serious organization, Dalton said. This isn't just criminals protecting stolen goods. This is institutional, structured. Someone's been funding that surveillance, maintaining it, keeping the secret alive across generations. Wade turned to look at the agent. How high does something like this go? Dalton was quiet for a moment, his jaw tight. In Samuel's journal, he documented connections between the theft ring and various officials, Park Service administrators, local law enforcement, even state politicians. If that network still exists, and everything you've described suggests it does, then we're looking at corruption that's embedded itself into the power structure. People with careers, families, reputations built on foundations of theft and murder. They won't go quietly. The convoy reached the trailhead that led to the tower. The snow from last night's storm had transformed the landscape into a pristine wilderness, unmarked except for the tracks Wade had left during his desperate escape. Dalton's team moved with precision, unloading equipment, establishing a perimeter, setting up communication relays that would allow them to coordinate with headquarters in Denver despite the remote location. Wade watched them work, impressed by the efficiency. These weren't local deputies out of their depth. These were federal agents who specialized in exactly this kind of operation. Mr. Mercer, a younger agent approached, her face serious beneath her FBI baseball cap. I'm Agent Lisa Chen, Evidence Recovery. We're going to need you to guide us to the tower and show us how to access the vault. After that, we'll need you to stay back while we process the scene. Wade nodded. Understood. The hike up took 90 minutes, slowed by the deep snow and the equipment the team carried. Wade led them along the same route he'd taken the day before, though in daylight and without men shooting at him, the mountain felt different, less threatening, more like the home he'd known for 2 decades. When they crested the final ridge and the tower came into view, several agents pulled out cameras and began documenting everything: the approach, the structure, the surroundings. Wade noticed something immediately. "The lock," he said, pointing to the door. "It's been replaced." Where he'd torn away the padlock yesterday, a new one now hung, bright and silver against the weathered wood. Dalton's expression darkened. "Someone came back after you left. Chen, get that lock off and dust for prints. Everyone else, stay alert. We might not be alone up here." 2 agents moved to secure the perimeter while Chen worked on the lock. It gave way quickly under her tools and the door swung open. The cabin looked exactly as Wade had left it, dust-covered and still, except for one detail. The hatch in the floor was open. Wade's stomach dropped. "They've been inside." Dalton drew his weapon and moved to the opening, shining a tactical light down into the vault below. After a tense moment, he holstered the weapon and looked at Wade. "It's clear, but you need to see this." Wade descended the ladder behind Dalton, and what he saw made his chest tighten with anger and grief. The vault had been ransacked. Crates lay open, their contents scattered across the stone floor. Filing cabinets hung open, folders pulled out and rifled through. The canvas tarps had been torn from the paintings and sculptures, several of which were now missing, leaving rectangular outlines in the dust where they'd stood. But most of the collection remained. Whoever had come back hadn't had time or ability to move everything. They'd taken the most portable, most valuable pieces, the ones that could be quickly sold or hidden, and left the rest. "Jesus," Agent Chen whispered as she descended into the vault behind them. "This is incredible. Even with what's missing, there must be tens of millions worth of artifacts here." Wade moved to the oak desk where Samuel's ledger had sat. It was gone, along with most of the documents from the filing cabinets, but the thieves had been hasty, desperate. Papers littered the floor, photographs scattered across the stone. They'd grabbed what they could carry and run, probably spooked by the FBI presence they must have detected on their surveillance equipment. Dalton knelt and picked up a photograph, a black and white image of 2 men loading crates into a truck. "Look at this," he said, showing it to Wade. "License plates visible. This is exactly the kind of evidence we need." Over the next 2 hours, the FBI team worked with meticulous care, photographing everything, cataloging every artifact, collecting every scrap of paper. Wade sat on the cabin floor above, exhausted, watching them work. He'd done his part. He'd found the vault, protected the journal, brought in the authorities. Now it was their case, their mission. Agent Dalton climbed up from the vault and sat beside him. "We found something interesting. There's a hidden compartment in the back wall of the vault, behind one of the filing cabinets. Samuel was smart. He kept the most important documents separate, protected. We've got names, dates, bank records, photographs of transactions. This is enough to start building cases." "What about the men who chased me?" Wade asked. "We're running the descriptions through our databases, cross-referencing with known associates of art theft rings. But Wade, I need to ask you something. In Samuel's journal, he mentioned hiding backup copies of his evidence in 3 locations: the Crow Agency, the University of Montana, and a shepherd's cabin near Granite Peak. Do you know where that cabin is?" Wade nodded slowly. "I do. It's about 3 miles from here. High Valley, stone structure. Nobody's used it in 50 years, maybe longer. We need to secure that location. If Samuel hid evidence there, and if the people we're after know about it, they'll try to get to it before we do." Wade pulled himself to his feet, every muscle protesting. "I'll take you there." "You're exhausted," Dalton said. "You should rest." "Those men know these mountains. They know I'm working with you now. If they get to that cabin first, we lose whatever Samuel hid there. I'm the fastest way through this terrain, and you know it." Dalton studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Okay, but you're taking 2 agents with you and you're all armed. This isn't a rescue mission. If you encounter resistance, you radio for backup and wait. Understood? Understood. 20 minutes later, Wade was hiking through the forest with Agents Chen and Marcus Reeves, Catherine's younger brother and a 10-year veteran of the FBI. Both agents moved well in the wilderness, better than Wade had expected, and they kept pace as he led them along a ridgeline that offered the fastest route to the shepherd's cabin. The sun was high now, burning off the cloud cover, turning the snow-covered landscape into a field of blinding white. Wade pulled down his snow goggles and kept moving, his body running on reserves he didn't know he had. "Tell me about Samuel Hartfield," Agent Chen said as they hiked. "What kind of man chooses to fight something like this alone?" Wade thought about the journal, about the entries he'd read in the quiet hours of the night. The kind who couldn't look away. Samuel saw injustice, saw cultural heritage being stolen and destroyed, and he couldn't pretend it wasn't happening. He tried the official channels first, reported it to his supervisors, tried to follow the rules. But when the rules failed, when the system protected the criminals instead of stopping them, he made a choice. "A choice that got him killed," Reeves said quietly. "Maybe. But it also preserved evidence that's going to bring down people who thought they were untouchable. 40 years later, Samuel's still fighting, still making a difference." They hiked in silence after that, each lost in their own thoughts. Wade found himself thinking about his own life, the years he'd spent in isolation, avoiding connection, avoiding responsibility. He'd told himself it was freedom, that solitude was a choice. But maybe it had been fear. Fear of caring too much, of being hurt, of mattering to anyone or anything. Samuel hadn't had that fear. He'd cared deeply, fiercely, and it had cost him everything. But it had also meant something. His life had meant something. The shepherd's cabin appeared through a stand of aspen trees, its stone walls dark against the white snow. The structure was ancient, built by Basque sheep herders in the late 1800s, constructed with such skill that it had survived over a century of mountain weather without collapsing. The wooden roof had partially caved in, but the walls stood solid, thick stone mortared with clay and time. Wade approached cautiously, senses alert. The snow around the cabin was undisturbed except for animal tracks, rabbit and deer. No human had been here recently, or at least not since the storm. He pushed open the wooden door, which hung crooked on rusted hinges. Inside, the cabin was a single room, maybe 10 feet square, with a stone fireplace on one wall and gaps in the roof that let in shafts of sunlight. Debris covered the floor, old wood, leaves, the bones of small animals. Agent Chen pulled out a flashlight and began a systematic search while Reeves stood watch at the door. "Samuel would have hidden something here that could survive decades," Wade said, thinking out loud. "Not paper, too fragile in this environment. Maybe something sealed, waterproof." Chen moved to the fireplace and began examining the stones. "Loose mortar here," she said, working her fingers into a gap. A stone came free, revealing a hollow space behind it. Inside was a metal box, military surplus ammunition can, sealed tight with a rubber gasket. "Got it," Chen said, carefully pulling out the container. She set it on the floor and opened the latches. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was a stack of photographs, a small ledger, and several rolls of microfilm. "Smart man," Chen murmured. "Microfilm doesn't degrade like paper. This could contain thousands of pages of documents." Wade felt a surge of relief. Samuel's backup had survived, protected by stone walls and careful planning. Whatever happened to the main vault, whatever the thieves had managed to steal or destroy, this cache would fill in the gaps. Reeves' radio crackled. "All units, we have movement near the tower. 2 suspects approaching from the north ridge, armed. All personnel take defensive positions." Chen quickly repacked the ammunition can. "We need to get back." They moved fast, abandoning caution for speed. Wade led them down through a ravine that cut travel time but required careful footing on loose scree and ice. Behind them, in the direction of the tower, they heard the faint pop of gunfire, distant but unmistakable. "They're hitting the tower," Reeves said, his voice tight. trying to destroy evidence or get to their people before we can identify them. Wade pushed harder, his lungs burning. They couldn't let Samuel's evidence be destroyed, not after 40 years, not when they were this close to justice. The tower came into view through the trees. Smoke rose from somewhere near the base, and Wade could see figures moving in tactical formation, FBI agents taking cover behind rocks and trees. The gunfire was sporadic now, controlled bursts rather than a sustained firefight. Dalton's voice came over Reeves's radio. "North team, status report." "Dalton, this is Reeves. We have the backup evidence from the shepherd's cabin. We're coming in from the East Ridge. Don't shoot us." "Copy that. Come in low. We have 2 shooters pinned down on the west side, but there might be more we haven't spotted." Wade led them in a wide arc, using the terrain for cover, approaching the tower from behind a rock outcrop that provided protection from the direction of the gunfire. They reached the FBI perimeter and crouched behind the tactical transport truck. Dalton was there, coordinating his team with calm precision. He looked at the ammunition can Chen carried and nodded with satisfaction. "Good work. Now stay down while we finish this." The standoff lasted another 30 minutes. The shooters, realizing they were outgunned and surrounded, eventually ceased fire. Dalton used a megaphone to call out to them. "You're surrounded by federal agents. Drop your weapons and come out with your hands visible. This is your only warning." A long silence followed. Then 2 figures emerged from behind a cluster of boulders, hands raised. Even from a distance, Wade recognized them. The silver-haired man and his shorter companion, the same 2 who'd confronted him in the storm. FBI agents moved in quickly, weapons trained, and within minutes both men were in custody, hands zip-tied behind their backs, being read their rights. Dalton approached them, his face hard. "Gentlemen, you're under arrest for assault with a deadly weapon on federal officers, destruction of evidence, and conspiracy to commit theft. That's just for starters. We're also looking at charges related to the murder of Samuel Hartfield in 1983. The silver-haired man met Dalton's eyes without flinching. "I want my lawyer, and you'll find that I have very good lawyers." "I'm sure you do," Dalton said. "But here's the thing about evidence. It doesn't care about lawyers. And we have decades of evidence, all carefully documented by a man you thought you'd silenced. Samuel Hartfield is about to have the last word." Wade watched as the 2 men were led away to a transport vehicle. He felt no satisfaction, no sense of victory, just a bone-deep exhaustion and the quiet knowledge that something important had been accomplished. The fight wasn't over, he knew that. These 2 were probably just soldiers, not the generals. The real power behind the theft ring was still out there, probably in offices and boardrooms, protected by money and position. But the wall of silence had been breached. The evidence would lead to more arrests, more investigations. The network Samuel had documented was about to be exposed to daylight. Agent Chen approached Wade, the ammunition can still under her arm. "We need to get you somewhere safe. Once word gets out about this arrest, about what we've found, there are going to be people who want to keep you quiet." Wade nodded, too tired to argue. "What happens now?" "Now we process the scene, catalog everything, and start building cases. The artifacts will be returned to their rightful owners, the tribes and museums they were stolen from. The evidence will be analyzed and witnesses will be interviewed. It's going to take months, maybe years." "And Samuel?" Chen's expression softened. "Samuel Hartfield will be recognized as a hero. His family will know the truth, and the people who killed him will face justice." Wade looked up at the tower, at the wooden structure that had guarded Samuel's secret for 4 decades. The sun was beginning to set, painting the mountains in shades of orange and purple. It was beautiful up here, peaceful in a way that made you forget the darkness humans were capable of. But the darkness was real, and sometimes the only thing standing against it was one person's decision to care, to fight, to refuse to look away. "He deserved better," Wade said quietly. "He deserved to see this happen himself." "Yes," Chen agreed. "But because of what he did, because he refused to give up, hundreds of artifacts are going to go home. Cultural heritage that was stolen is going to be restored. That's a legacy most people never get to leave." Dalton joined them, pulling off his tactical gloves. "Mr. Mercer, I want to thank you officially. What you found, what you protected, it's going to make a real difference. The Bureau is going to need your full cooperation over the coming months. Testimony, depositions, possibly trial appearances." "I understand," Wade said. "I also want you to know that there will be protection available if you need it. These people, they're not going to take this lying down. You've made yourself a threat to some very powerful interests." Wade looked out at the mountains, at the wilderness that had been his home for so long. The thought of leaving, of entering witness protection, or hiding somewhere under guard felt like a death sentence of a different kind. But he'd made his choice when he opened that trapdoor. There was no going back to the simple solitude of his cabin, to the life where his biggest concern was whether he had enough firewood for winter. "I'll do whatever's necessary," he said finally. "Samuel gave everything for this. The least I can do is see it through." That night, Wade sat in a hotel room in Billings, the first bed he'd slept in for years, staring at a television that showed his own face on the evening news. The story had broken fast, fed to the media by the FBI to get ahead of any attempts to spin the narrative. "Mountain Man discovers multi-million-dollar art theft ring," the headlines read. His phone, which he'd charged for the first time in days, buzzed constantly with messages from people he hadn't spoken to in years, old friends, distant family, journalists wanting interviews. He ignored them all, except one. Catherine Reeves had sent a simple text. "You did good, Wade. Samuel would be proud. I'm writing the full story. Want to make sure we get it right. Call when you're ready." Wade looked at the text for a long time, then typed a reply. "Tell his story, not mine. He's the hero here." Her response came immediately. "I'll tell both. The world needs heroes like Samuel who fight in the shadows, but it also needs people like you who bring their sacrifices into the light. Together, you changed everything." Wade set down the phone and closed his eyes. Tomorrow, there would be more questions, more statements, more steps in the long process of bringing the theft ring to justice. But tonight, for the first time in 2 days, he allowed himself to rest. Outside his window, the mountains stood dark against the stars, eternal and indifferent. But somewhere up there, in a stone vault beneath a wooden tower, Samuel Hartfield's legacy had finally been honored. The truth had survived, and that made all the difference. The morning after the arrest, Wade woke to find the world had shifted beneath him. His phone showed 147 missed calls, 63 text messages, and a string of voicemails from numbers he didn't recognize. The hotel television played his story on 3 different news channels, each showing footage of the tower, the FBI presence, and a grainy photograph of Wade himself that someone had dug up from a wilderness conservation article years ago. He looked younger in that photo, less weathered, still carrying the belief that isolation was the answer to life's complications. Agent Dalton knocked on his door at 7 a.m. sharp, carrying coffee and a folder thick with documents. "Hope you got some rest," he said, settling into the chair by the window. "We've got a lot to cover today." Wade took the coffee gratefully, his body still aching from the ordeal. "What's the situation?" "The situation is that you've kicked over a hornet's nest bigger than anyone expected. The 2 men we arrested yesterday, the silver-haired man is named Victor Hastings, former military intelligence, dishonorable discharge in 1995 for misappropriation of resources. Since then, he's been a security consultant for various private collectors and auction houses. The shorter man is Eddie Kozlov, enforcer with ties to organized crime in 3 states. And they talked? Dalton smiled grimly. Not a word. Lawyered up immediately as expected. But we don't need them to talk. The evidence from Samuel's vault and the backup cache at the shepherd's cabin is telling us everything we need to know. We've identified 17 separate cases of major theft between 1976 and 1983, with a combined value exceeding $300 million. And that's just what Samuel documented. We think there's more. Wade set down his coffee, the enormity of it settling over him. 300 million. The artifacts you found represent about 265 million of that total. The rest were pieces Samuel documented but couldn't intercept, items that were successfully sold or moved before he could act. We're tracing those now through auction records and private collections. Dalton opened the folder and spread several photographs across the small hotel table. Wade recognized some from the vault, images of the men loading trucks, meeting in parking lots, exchanging envelopes. But others were new, surveillance-style shots of people in suits, in offices, in what looked like government buildings. This is where it gets complicated, Dalton continued. Samuel's evidence doesn't just implicate thieves and smugglers. It points to a network of enablers, people who provided cover, falsified reports, buried investigations. We're talking about Park Service administrators, local law enforcement, state officials. Some of these people are dead now, but others are still alive, still in positions of influence. Wade studied the faces, trying to read the story behind each one. How do you prosecute something like that? Carefully, methodically. We start with the provable crimes, the theft, the conspiracy, the murder of Samuel Hartfield. We build airtight cases against the people directly involved. Then we follow the money, the protection, the cover-up. It's going to take years, Wade, but it starts with what you found. Over the next week, Wade gave statement after statement, walking federal prosecutors through every detail of his discovery. They wanted to know everything, the exact time he arrived at the tower, what he touched, what he moved, how he knew where to look. They recorded hours of testimony, documented every step of his journey from the moment he broke the lock to the moment he called Catherine Reeves from the highway. During breaks, Wade would stand at the hotel window and stare out at the mountains in the distance, feeling the pull of home, the desire to return to his cabin and his simple life. But Agent Chen's words echoed in his mind. Once word gets out, there are going to be people who want to keep you quiet. His cabin was no longer safe. His old life was no longer available. On the 8th day, Dalton arrived with different news. "We found her," he said simply. "Samuel's sister." Wade's heart jumped. "She's alive?" Margaret Hartfield, 78 years old, living in a retirement community in Spokane. She never believed her brother was lost in the wilderness. She's been writing letters to law enforcement agencies for 40 years, demanding they investigate his disappearance as a homicide. Everyone dismissed her as a grieving sister who couldn't accept the truth. But she was right. She was absolutely right. And Wade, she wants to meet you. She wants to thank you for not giving up on her brother's story. 2 days later, Wade found himself in a small, sunny room in a Spokane retirement home, sitting across from a woman whose face showed every year of her grief and vindication. Margaret Hartfield had her brother's eyes, sharp and observant, and the same determined set to her jaw. She held a framed photograph in her lap, a picture of Samuel in his ranger uniform, young and idealistic, standing in front of a fire lookout. "This was taken his first year," Margaret said, her voice strong despite the tremor in her hands. "He wrote me letters every week that season, said he'd finally found his calling, said the mountains made sense in a way the world never had." Wade leaned forward, his voice gentle. "He was a remarkable man." "He was stubborn," Margaret said with a sad smile. "Always had to do things the hard way, the right way. My mother used to say Samuel was born with an overdeveloped sense of justice. He couldn't stand seeing wrong done even as a child. If someone was being bullied, Samuel would step in. If someone needed help, Samuel would offer it. It cost him friends, opportunities, but it made him who he was." She looked up at Wade, and tears glistened in her eyes. "When he disappeared, the officials said he got lost in a storm, that he wasn't experienced enough to survive the early winter. But Samuel knew those mountains better than anyone. He wouldn't have gotten lost. I knew something had happened to him. I knew someone had hurt him." "You were right," Wade said quietly. "And now we have proof. The evidence Samuel collected is going to bring justice, not just for him, but for everyone whose heritage was stolen." Margaret reached out and gripped Wade's hand with surprising strength. "You gave me my brother back. Not his body. I know we'll probably never find that. But his honor, his truth. For 40 years, people thought he was just a foolish ranger who made a mistake. Now they'll know he was a hero. Wade's throat tightened. He saved those artifacts because he believed they mattered. He believed history and culture were worth protecting, even if it cost him everything. "That sounds like Samuel," Margaret said, wiping her eyes. "Always putting principle above safety. Tell me, what happens to the collection now?" "The FBI is working with tribal councils, museums, and cultural heritage organizations to identify every piece and return it to its rightful owners. Some of the artifacts have been missing for 50 years. Families are going to get back pieces of their history they thought were lost forever." Margaret nodded, closing her eyes. "Then Samuel's sacrifice meant something. That's all I needed to know." They sat together for another hour, Margaret sharing stories of her brother's childhood, his love of the outdoors, his unwavering moral compass. Wade listened, understanding more about the man whose journal he'd carried through a blizzard, whose legacy he'd fought to protect. When Wade finally stood to leave, Margaret pulled him into a fierce embrace. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for being brave enough to care." Back in Billings, the investigation expanded rapidly. The microfilm from the shepherd's cabin, once developed and analyzed, revealed thousands of pages of documents Samuel had meticulously copied. Shipping manifests, financial records, coded communications between members of the theft ring. Combined with the physical evidence from the vault, federal prosecutors began building cases against 14 individuals, some living, some deceased. The arrests came in waves. First, a retired park superintendent in Wyoming who'd provided false reports to cover up suspicious activities in national forests. Then a gallery owner in Santa Fe whose records showed the acquisition of suspicious artifacts matching descriptions from Samuel's documentation. Each arrest led to more evidence, more connections, more names in the network. But the biggest breakthrough came when prosecutors offered Victor Hastings a deal. Facing life in prison for the attempted murder of federal officers, Hastings agreed to cooperate in exchange for a reduced sentence. What he revealed shocked even the seasoned investigators. Agent Dalton called Wade to his office and closed the door. "Hastings gave us the name of the person at the top, the one who's been running the network since the beginning. Wade, it's Senator Graham Pierce from Montana." Wade felt the floor shift. Senator Pierce was a fixture in Montana politics, serving since 1992, known for his work on conservation and land management. He'd been on television just last month, giving speeches about protecting wilderness areas and preserving cultural heritage. "Are you certain?" Wade asked. Hastings provided documentation, offshore accounts, communications, even a recording from 2008, where Pierce discusses maintaining surveillance on the tower. Pierce was 25 years old in 1983. Working as an aide to the then Secretary of the Interior. He was part of the ring from the beginning, and when the older generation died off or retired, he took over. He's been using his political position to protect the network, to bury investigations, to ensure the stolen artifacts could eventually be sold once enough time had passed. Wade sat heavily in the chair. "Samuel's evidence pointed to corruption in high places, but I didn't think it would go this high." "Neither did we, but the evidence is ironclad. Pierce's arrest warrant is being prepared now. By tomorrow morning, this is going to be the biggest political scandal to hit Montana in a generation." The arrest of Senator Graham Pierce made national headlines. Federal agents took him into custody at his office in Washington, D.C., walking him out in handcuffs past cameras and reporters shouting questions. His denials were immediate and vehement, claims of political persecution, manufactured evidence, conspiracy theories. But as more details emerged, as prosecutors laid out the decades of theft and cover-up, public opinion turned decisively against him. Wade watched the news coverage from a safe house the FBI had arranged, a small cabin ironically similar to his own, tucked away in the Black Hills of South Dakota. Agent Chen had been assigned as his security detail, rotating with 2 other agents to ensure his safety until the trials began. "How does it feel?" Chen asked one evening as they watched Pierce's attorney give another press conference, denying all charges. "Knowing you brought down a senator?" Wade shook his head. I didn't bring him down. Samuel did. I just made sure his work wasn't buried with him. Samuel gathered the evidence, but you had the courage to bring it forward. In this political climate, with the kind of power Pierce wielded, that took real guts. You could have walked away, sold those artifacts quietly, retired rich and anonymous. The thought never crossed my mind, Wade said honestly. Those artifacts, they're not commodities. They're pieces of people's souls, their ancestors' work, their cultural identity. How do you put a price on that? Chen smiled. Most people would find a way. That's what makes what you did special. Over the following months, Wade's life became a strange hybrid of isolation and public exposure. He remained in protective custody, moving between safe houses, rarely seeing anyone except federal agents and lawyers preparing for trial. But his name was everywhere. Articles in newspapers, segments on television, online debates about whether he was a hero or just a lucky treasure hunter who'd stumbled onto someone else's sacrifice. Catherine Reeves published her investigative piece in a major national magazine, a 20,000-word deep dive into Samuel Hartfield's life, his solitary mission, and the network of corruption he'd died fighting. The article won awards and sparked congressional hearings into theft from federal lands. Catherine interviewed Margaret Hartfield, tribal elders whose artifacts had been recovered, and Wade himself in a series of long phone conversations from the safe house. "You're becoming a symbol," Catherine told him during one call, "a reminder that individual action still matters, that one person who refuses to look away can change the world." "I'm not comfortable being a symbol," Wade replied. "I'm just a guy who found something and did what was right." "That's exactly why you're the perfect symbol. You didn't seek this out. You didn't want fame or recognition. You just couldn't let injustice stand. That's the kind of heroism we need more of." The trials began in the spring, almost 9 months after Wade had first broken the lock on the tower door. Senator Pierce's trial was the centerpiece, covered by media from around the country. Wade testified for 3 days, walking the jury through his discovery, Samuel's journal, the evidence that connected Pierce to 40 years of organized theft. Defense attorneys tried to discredit him, painting him as an unreliable hermit, a man who'd lived in isolation so long he couldn't distinguish reality from fantasy. But the physical evidence backed up every word of Wade's testimony, and when prosecutors introduced recordings of Pierce discussing the theft ring, recordings Victor Hastings had secretly made as insurance, the defense collapsed. Senator Graham Pierce was convicted on 37 counts, including racketeering, conspiracy to commit theft, obstruction of justice, and accessory to murder in the death of Samuel Hartfield. He was sentenced to 45 years in federal prison. Victor Hastings received 22 years. Eddie Kozlov received 18. In total, 11 people were convicted in connection with the theft ring, with 3 more awaiting trial. But the real victory came in a ceremony Wade almost didn't attend. The FBI had organized a formal return of the recovered artifacts to their rightful owners, a gathering at the Montana Historical Society attended by tribal leaders, museum directors, and cultural heritage advocates from around the country. Wade had planned to skip it, uncomfortable with the attention, but Agent Dalton had personally called and insisted. "These people need to thank you," Dalton had said, "and you need to see what your courage accomplished." Wade arrived at the ceremony wearing the only dress shirt he owned, borrowed boots that were slightly too big, and an overwhelming sense of not belonging. The grand hall of the Historical Society was packed with people, and at the front of the room stood display cases containing some of the recovered artifacts. The Paiute basket Samuel had written about, ceremonial objects, ancient tools, textiles that hadn't been seen by tribal members in generations. An elder from the Crow Nation, Thomas White Eagle's grandson, spoke first. "My grandfather received a package in 1983, sent by a ranger named Samuel Hartfield. Inside were photographs and documents about stolen artifacts. My grandfather tried to bring attention to it, but he was dismissed, told he was mistaken. He died believing his efforts had failed. Today we honor his memory and the memory of Samuel Hartfield, and we thank Wade Mercer for ensuring their sacrifices were not in vain." One by one, representatives from different tribes and museums came forward to speak, each expressing gratitude for the return of their cultural heritage. A woman from the Smithsonian described an artifact that had been missing from their collection since 1979, a ceremonial pipe that researchers had believed was lost forever. A curator from the Denver Art Museum spoke about paintings that would now be displayed for public education rather than hidden in private vaults. Then Margaret Hartfield was brought to the podium, assisted by a young woman Wade recognized as her granddaughter. Margaret's voice was thin but clear as she addressed the crowd. My brother Samuel wrote in his journal that every artifact he saved was a piece of history preserved, a piece of someone's heritage protected. He understood something that too many people forget. We are all custodians of the past, responsible for ensuring that future generations can connect with their ancestry, their culture, their identity. Samuel gave his life for that principle, and Mr. Wade Mercer honored that sacrifice by refusing to let it be buried. We owe them both a debt we can never fully repay. The crowd rose in applause. Wade, sitting in the back row, felt tears streaming down his face. For the first time since this journey began, he understood the true weight of what had been accomplished. This wasn't just about catching criminals or recovering stolen property. It was about restoring connections between people and their past, about healing wounds that had festered for decades, about proving that truth could survive even when powerful forces tried to bury it. After the ceremony, Wade found himself surrounded by people wanting to shake his hand, to thank him, to share stories of what the recovered artifacts meant to their communities. He listened to each one, humbled by the depth of emotion, the sense of restoration and healing. An elderly native woman approached him last, her hands weathered and strong. "I am Mary Whitecrow," she said. "My grandmother made the basket you found, the one Samuel Hartfield wrote about in his journal. It was stolen from our tribal center in 1980. I thought I would die without ever seeing my grandmother's work again. But because of you, because of Samuel, I held it this morning. I was able to touch something my grandmother's hands had touched. Do you understand what that means?" Wade's voice was thick with emotion. "I'm beginning to." She placed her hands on his shoulders and spoke in her native language, words Wade didn't understand but felt deeply. Then in English she said, "You are blessed with purpose. Walk forward in that blessing." That evening, as the sun set over the mountains visible from the Historical Society's windows, Wade stood alone on the building's steps. Agent Dalton found him there, 2 cups of coffee in hand. "Hell of a day," Dalton said, offering Wade a cup. "Hell of a year," Wade replied. "So what's next for you?" "You've got reward money coming, substantial finder's fees from multiple sources. The recovered artifacts are valued at $265 million, and standard finder's fees on recovered stolen property can run up to 15%. You're looking at close to $40 million, Wade." Wade stared at the mountains, at the wilderness that had been his home for so long. $40 million, an amount of money he couldn't even conceptualize. But he thought about Samuel, living in that tower for years, protecting artifacts worth far more, never selling a single piece, purpose over profit, principle over comfort. "I want to create something," Wade said slowly. "A foundation, maybe. Something that supports people who try to do the right thing when systems fail them. Whistleblowers, investigators, people like Samuel who see injustice and can't look away. They need protection, resources, legal support." Dalton nodded slowly. "The Hartfield Foundation. I like it. And I want to fund search and rescue operations in wilderness areas. Pay for equipment, training, coordination. Every year, people get lost in these mountains. Some of them don't come home. Maybe I can help change that." "Those are good goals," Dalton said. "Honorable uses for the money." "What about you?" Wade asked. "Where does the FBI go from here?" "We keep investigating. Pierce's conviction opened doors to other cases, other networks. Art theft, antiquities smuggling, it's a multi-billion-dollar criminal industry, and this case proved we can penetrate it with the right evidence and determination. We're establishing a new task force, dedicated to cold cases involving cultural heritage crimes. I'm going to head it." Wade smiled. Samuel would approve. I think he would, Dalton agreed. You know, in all my years with the Bureau, I've never seen evidence as meticulously documented as what Samuel left behind. Every photograph labeled, every artifact catalogued, every connection mapped out. He knew he might not survive to see justice done, but he made damn sure the evidence would. He was a remarkable man. So are you, Wade. Don't discount what you did. Samuel gathered the evidence, but it sat hidden for 40 years. You brought it to light. That took courage, integrity, and a willingness to sacrifice your comfortable isolation for something bigger. Not everyone would have made that choice. They stood in comfortable silence as the sky darkened and stars began to appear. Wade thought about his cabin, still waiting for him in the mountains, empty and cold. He thought about the life he'd lived there, solitary and simple. Part of him longed to return, to slip back into that quiet existence. But he knew he couldn't. He'd been changed by this experience, stretched and reshaped into someone who understood that isolation wasn't freedom, it was avoidance. I'm going back to the mountains, Wade said finally, but not to hide. I'm going to use that cabin as a base, establish the foundation there, create a retreat center for people who need space to heal or think or find their courage. The wilderness has a way of clarifying things, of stripping away the noise and showing you what really matters. That sounds perfect, Dalton said. Just promise me you'll install a decent security system and keep a satellite phone charged. Wade laughed. Deal. 6 months later, Wade stood on the platform of Tower 17, watching the sun rise over the Montana wilderness. The tower had been restored, officially designated as a historical site, the Samuel Hartfield Memorial Lookout. A bronze plaque on the door told Samuel's story. His years of solitary vigilance, his courageous stand against corruption, his ultimate sacrifice. The vault below had been sealed and documented, preserved as evidence and memorial. Wade came here often now, hiking up from his cabin with supplies for the small caretaker team that rotated through, maintaining the site and giving tours to the steady stream of visitors who came to honor Samuel's memory. The Samuel Hartfield Foundation was officially established, its endowment funded by Wade's reward money. Already, they'd helped 3 whistleblowers facing retaliation, funded 2 investigations into cultural heritage crimes, and equipped 5 search and rescue teams in western states. Margaret Hartfield had passed away peacefully 3 months ago, her granddaughter telling Wade that Margaret's final words had been, "Tell Samuel I'm proud of him." Wade had attended the funeral, standing in the back of the church as the community celebrated a woman who'd never stopped fighting for her brother's truth. Now, as Wade watched the golden light spread across the peaks, he thought about legacy, about what we leave behind when our time ends. Samuel had left evidence, proof of his courage and integrity. Margaret had left persistence, 4 decades of refusing to accept injustice. And what would Wade leave? He pulled out a small notebook, something he'd started keeping after Samuel's journal had been entered into evidence. In it, he wrote about the people he met, the cases the foundation supported, the lives that were touched by Samuel's sacrifice. He wrote about truth and courage, about the importance of standing up even when you stood alone. Maybe someday, someone would read these words and find strength in them. Maybe that was enough. His satellite phone buzzed. A text from Catherine Reeves. New lead on stolen artifacts in Oregon. Interested in consulting? Wade smiled. He'd become an unofficial advisor to several investigations, his understanding of wilderness hiding places and criminal psychology proving valuable. He typed back, "Send me the details." Below him, a group of hikers appeared on the trail, making their way toward the tower. Wade recognized them as a school group, high schoolers from the reservation, part of a cultural heritage program. Their teacher, a young native woman, waved up at him. "Mr. Mercer, we were hoping to find you here." Wade climbed down to meet them. The students gathered around, some shy, others bold with questions. "Is it true you found $200 million worth of treasure?" one boy asked. "It's true I found artifacts worth that much," Wade corrected gently, "but they weren't treasure. They were stolen heritage, stolen history, The real treasure was returning them to the people they belonged to. The teacher smiled at him gratefully. "We're studying Samuel Hartfield in our class." The students wanted to see where he worked, where he made his stand. Wade led them up into the tower, showing them the restored cabin, the fire finder, the spot where the hatch had been. He told them Samuel's story, not as legend, but as truth. A man who'd made difficult choices, who'd sacrificed comfort and safety for principle. The students listened raptly, some taking notes, others simply absorbing the weight of being in this place where history had been made. "What would you have done?" a girl asked Wade. "If you'd found the vault but knew reporting it would end your quiet life? Would you still have called the FBI?" Wade thought about it seriously. "I'd like to say I would have done the right thing no matter what, but honestly, I almost didn't. I stood there in that parking lot with my phone in my hand, and part of me wanted to drive away, to pretend I'd never found it. The easy choice would have been to protect my own peace." "So why didn't you?" the girl pressed. "Because I read Samuel's journal. Because I saw what one person's courage could accomplish even after they were gone. And I realized that some things are bigger than our comfort, bigger than our desire for a quiet life. Truth matters. Justice matters. And sometimes we're called to stand up for those things, even when we don't want to." The teacher placed a hand on Wade's shoulder. "That's what we're trying to teach them. That they matter. That their voices matter. That one person can make a difference." As the group departed, hiking back down the trail with excited chatter and new understanding, Wade remained on the platform. He thought about how different his life was now from what it had been just over a year ago. He'd lost his anonymity, his isolation, his simple existence. But he'd gained something more valuable. Purpose, connection, the knowledge that his life meant something beyond his own survival. The wind moved through the pines, carrying the scent of snow from the high peaks. Winter was coming again, the cycle continuing as it always had. But Wade was no longer the man who'd climbed this mountain alone, looking for forgotten structures and avoiding human connection. He was part of something now, part of a story that would outlive him, part of a legacy that stretched back to Samuel Hartfield and forward to generations who would learn from their example. He pulled out his notebook and wrote, "We think we choose isolation to protect ourselves from pain, from disappointment, from the messy complexity of human connection. But what we're really doing is choosing not to matter." Samuel Hartfield chose to matter. He chose to stand for something, even knowing it might cost him everything. That's the kind of courage the world needs. That's the kind of legacy worth leaving. Wade closed the notebook and took one last look at the mountains, stretching endlessly in all directions. Somewhere out there, other secrets waited to be found, other wrongs waited to be righted. But for today, for this moment, he was exactly where he needed to be. Standing in a tower that had once guarded a secret, that now stood as a memorial to truth, courage, and the belief that one person's stand could echo through decades. Anyone can make a difference if they're brave enough to care when it would be easier to look away, if they're strong enough to stand for truth when silence would be safer, and if they understand that legacy isn't measured in wealth or comfort, but in the lives touched, the wrongs made right, and the courage passed forward to those who come after. As the sun climbed higher, Wade descended the tower and began the hike back to his cabin, to his foundation work, to the life he was building from the ashes of his isolation. He was no longer hiding in the wilderness. He was serving it, protecting it, using it to heal others and teach the lessons Samuel Hartfield had died to preserve. The mountain man who'd explored an abandoned fire lookout had become something more. A guardian of truth, a keeper of legacy, a living reminder that heroism often comes not from seeking glory, but from simply refusing to let evil triumph in silence. And somewhere, Wade believed, Samuel Hartfield was finally at peace, knowing his sacrifice had not been in vain, knowing that the truth he'd protected for so long had finally come to light. The end. Up next, 2 more powerful stories are waiting for you. Click now to keep discovering. And don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe the truth deserves a voice and that one person's courage can change the world.